The notice came on a Wednesday. Vera remembered that detail later, the way small things attach themselves to the moments that shift everything. She had been sitting on an overturned milk crate in the empty ground floor of the building on Maple Street, sorting through a cardboard box of her mother's papers, when the city inspector knocked against the hollow door frame. The front door had gone missing sometime in the 90s. The inspector did not seem surprised by that. He handed her an envelope without quite looking at her. Building condemned. Occupancy prohibited. 7 days to vacate the premises or face a daily fine of $250, compounding. Vera folded the letter along its original crease and put it in her coat pocket. She said thank you. He left. She sat back down on the milk crate and looked around at the room. Cracked plaster walls, water stains spreading across the ceiling in shapes that reminded her of old maps. The ghost of a display counter still visible where the paint had held its color. Her mother had run a dress shop in this building for 31 years. Vera had grown up in the back room on Saturday mornings, hemming skirts on the machine her mother kept near the window that faced the alley. She remembered the smell of that room. Cedar, thread, the sweetness of the lavender sachets her mother tucked into every drawer. That was a long time ago. She was 58 years old, and this building was the only thing left to her name. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. 3 months before the notice arrived, Vera had been living in a rental apartment in Columbus. She had been there for 2 years, ever since the divorce was finalized. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a building that smelled of mildew and cooking oil, and the elevator worked about half the time. She had a bedroom, a bathroom, a kitchen with a window that looked onto the brick wall of the next building. It was small. She paid the rent on time every month out of what she made doing bookkeeping for a dental practice downtown. The marriage had lasted 31 years. She had met Gary Calloway at 26. They built something together, or she had believed they had. A house in Worthington with 3 bedrooms and a garden she had planted along the south fence herself, hydrangeas and black-eyed Susans, and one stubborn rosebush that bloomed every June without fail. A savings account that had taken them 2 decades to build. A life that looked, from the outside, like the kind of life that holds. She found out about the affair the way people usually discover things that have been hidden for a long time, by accident. A receipt. A text message on a phone left face up on the kitchen counter. The blindness that comes from trusting someone is its own kind of protection, and when it goes all at once. Gary filed first. His attorney was better than hers. The house went to him, along with the savings. The settlement built around the argument that Vera had stopped working full-time in her 40s to manage the household, and that her earning capacity had therefore diminished. That this counted against her. She had sat across a conference table and watched the logic of it explained to her as though she were being corrected. She signed the papers on a Tuesday in February. The notary had been gentle. That had almost made it worse. She moved into the Columbus apartment with a car, a mattress, a set of dishes, and $4,300. Temporary, she told herself. She would get back on her feet. She had done the bookkeeping work for the dental practice for 18 months without missing a day. She had learned their software in a weekend. She was good at it, careful and consistent, and she told herself that being good and careful and consistent would eventually add up to something solid. Then the practice closed. The dentist retired. No severance. Just a card signed by the staff, a handshake, and a final paycheck that covered rent and not much else. She had $412 in her checking account when her mother died. Edna Marsh had owned the building on Maple Street in Sycamore Falls for decades, along with the farmhouse on County Road 7 where Vera and her siblings had grown up, a small parcel of land her own father had left her, a savings account her children had never seen the full figure of, jewelry she had worn on Sundays and holidays and nowhere else. Edna had been careful with money the way people are careful when they grow up without it. She had never thrown away anything that still had use. She had never borrowed what she could wait and save for. The will was read in a lawyer's office in Sycamore Falls on a cold Thursday in January. Vera drove 3 hours to get there. Her older brother Dale was already seated when she arrived. Dale was a real estate developer in Cincinnati, broad-shouldered and well-dressed, the kind of man who occupied a room not by being loud, but by being settled. His wife sat beside him, though spouses had not been asked. Patricia, Vera's younger sister, arrived a few minutes later wearing a coat that cost more than Vera's monthly rent. Patricia had lived in Scottsdale for the last 8 years. She had married twice and carried the accumulated confidence of that fact in the way she moved. Neither of them asked how Vera was doing. The lawyer read the will in a flat, methodical voice. The farmland went to Dale. The house on County Road 7, to be held jointly by Dale and Patricia. The savings account divided between them. The jewelry to Patricia. The furniture to be split between the two of them as they agreed. And the building on Maple Street in Sycamore Falls to Vera. Dale coughed once, briefly, the kind of cough that has nothing to do with the throat. Patricia looked at her fingernails. The lawyer moved on to the next clause. No one said anything about it directly until Dale stopped Vera in the parking lot afterward, one hand briefly on her arm. "You know that place has been condemned," he said. His tone was businesslike, the same tone he used when explaining problems that already had solutions. "The city flagged it 2 years ago. You're not going to get anything out of it. There's a developer interested in the lot, actually. I could make some calls, get you a share after the sale. It's the practical move." Vera said she'd think about it. Patricia texted her that evening. "Vera, you should really listen to Dale on this one. That building is a money pit. We'd hate to see you get stuck." Vera did not write back. She drove to Sycamore Falls the following morning and parked in front of the building on Maple Street for the first time in 11 years. It looked worse than she'd prepared herself for. The brick was sound, she thought, at least on the ground level, but the mortar between the upper courses had eroded badly and would need repointing. 2 second-floor windows were broken through, starbursts of missing glass. Water damage showed under the eaves on the east side, dark staining that had been running for years. The mounting brackets where the old sign had hung left lighter rectangles in the brick, ghost marks of the letters that had spelled out her mother's name. She sat in the car for a while. Then she got out. The ground floor smelled of damp and cold wood, and something underneath those smells that she could not name, old paper maybe, or stone. Part of the ceiling had come down in the northwest corner, the plaster split and fallen, exposing the joists above. But the floor was solid under her feet, the old hardwood darkened with age but not rotted. The back room was empty except for a broken chair and a stack of water-damaged magazines that had fused together into something more like a block than a pile. The window that faced the alley still had its glass. She climbed the stairs to the second floor. They were steep, but they held her weight. The upper floor had been used for storage at some point in the past. Old garment racks were pushed against one wall, the kind with the rolling wheels, one of them still draped with a strip of brown paper. A dressing mirror leaned in its frame, the silver backing fogged with age. Cardboard boxes along the far wall had collapsed inward with moisture. And at the far end of the room, a door she did not remember. Plain wood, painted the same off-white as the rest of the room. No knob. Only a keyhole, old-fashioned, with a long vertical slot. The paint around the keyhole had worn away to bare wood. Vera crossed the room and tried the door. It did not move. She pressed her ear to it and heard nothing, no draft, no distant sound. Just wood and silence. She went back downstairs. In the weeks between the will reading and this moment, she had tried every other option. 3 property management companies told her the building was unrentable while the condemnation notice stood. One of them added, not unkindly, that even after that, the area had limited demand. A contractor she called said the repair costs to bring the building to code would run between $60,000 and $90,000, depending on what was found once walls opened up. She did not have $60 to spare, let alone $60,000. She called Dale and left a message asking if he would consider splitting the cost of basic repairs, given that clearing the condemnation would make the lot more valuable to sell. He did not return the call. Patricia texted, "Vera, this is exactly what we were talking about. You need to stop and think clearly." She was tired of being told to think clearly by people who did not know what she was thinking. She drove back to Columbus, gave notice on the apartment, packed what she owned into her car, and drove back to Sycamore Falls. She brought the milk crate because it was useful. She spread her mattress on the floor of the back room, the room with the alley window, and she stayed. She had been sleeping there for 11 days when the inspector arrived with the notice. After he left, she did not sit still for long. She took out the notebook she had started keeping and walked through the building again, room by room, this time with a flashlight because the power had been cut when the condemnation went through. She wrote down everything, what needed immediate attention, what could wait. What was beyond her alone? The column labeled beyond her alone was the longest. The column for immediate was nearly as long. The column for what could wait had 3 items. The roof was the worst problem. There was active leaking over the northwest corner of the 2nd floor. The subfloor in that area had softened. She could not fix that without a roofer, and a roofer cost money she did not have. But she could tarp it. She drove to the hardware store on the square and bought heavy poly sheeting, roofing nails, and a pair of work gloves. The hardware store owner, a man named Carl Benton who had been in business on that same corner since before Vera left Sycamore Falls, watched her load the materials without saying much. Then he said, "You know the city's going to fine you." "I know," she said. Carl leaned on the counter. "Your brother called me. Asked me not to sell you anything. Said you were in over your head and making things worse for yourself." She looked at him. He shrugged one shoulder. "I told him what I sell and to who is my business." A pause. "Your mother was a good woman. She knew what she was doing." She knew what she was doing. Not had done. Vera paid for the tarp and the nails and the gloves and did not say anything more, but she thought about those 4 words all the way back to Maple Street. She tarped the roof section by herself. It took most of an afternoon, climbing out through the broken 2nd floor window onto the lower roof face with the sheeting and a hammer, her knees aching on the wet surface. She slipped once and caught herself on the window frame. She came down with scraped palms and a bruised knee and stood in the alley and looked up at what she had done. It held. That was the first night she did not sleep badly. On day 8, the city sent a 2nd notice. Vera called the building authority and spoke to a woman who was businesslike, but not unkind. She explained what an inspection would require. Functional utilities, no active structural failure, no immediate health hazard. Vera asked whether provisional occupancy status was possible while she worked toward full compliance. The woman put her on hold for several minutes, then came back and said it was possible, subject to the inspector's discretion. The inspector returned on day 12. He was the same man who had delivered the first notice. He walked through the building with a clipboard and said little. Vera walked alongside him. He spent a long time in the northwest corner examining the soft subfloor, and she told him about the tarp, and he went up and checked it without comment. He spent time at the top of the basement stairwell, too, though he did not go all the way down. The door at the bottom of the stairs was locked, the wood swollen in its frame, the padlock rusted dark. "What's down there?" he asked. "I don't know yet," Vera said. "I haven't been able to find a key." He wrote something on his clipboard. At the end of the walkthrough, he told her that the building's primary structure was sounder than the condemnation report had indicated. The report had been based on a drive-by assessment done 2 years ago, without interior access. He would recommend provisional occupancy, pending utility restoration and addressing the soft subfloor section. She thanked him. He said it was not a favor, just accurate. She called an electrician that afternoon. The cost was steep. She paid with the last of the cash she had plus $100 on a credit card she had not used in 2 years. The power came back on that Thursday. When the lights came on in the back room, she stood still for a moment, just stood in the middle of the floor and let herself feel the small, solid fact of it. Then she kept moving. She had no bed frame. The mattress stayed on the floor, on top of the rug she had unrolled from the corner of the old dressing room. A faded Persian in burgundy and cream that had been left behind so long ago, she had no idea when. She set up the folding table, the milk crate, her dishes. She got the bathroom functional after watching a video on her phone and lying on the cold tile floor with a wrench for 40 minutes, replacing a wax ring under the toilet that had failed. When it stopped leaking, she sat back against the wall and breathed. The gray cat appeared in the alley on the 3rd morning. She had not been looking for a cat. She put out a small amount of tuna from a can she opened for herself and went inside. The cat was there the next morning and the morning after that, and by the end of the first week it had found its way through a gap in the back door and taken up a position at the foot of the mattress. She named it Edna. It seemed right. People in town noticed her. Sycamore Falls had about 3,000 residents. Her mother had been a known figure here for decades, a woman you waved to on the sidewalk, whose shop you stopped into at Christmas. Vera had been a known figure too, once, before she left and became someone in Columbus. Coming back this way, alone, living inside a building most people had assumed would be sold for the lot, was not something that went unnoticed. The woman who ran the insurance agency 2 doors down stopped her one morning. "Are you really staying in there?" she asked, wearing concern the way people sometimes wear it. as a covering for something more complicated. People are talking, Vera. I just think you should know. Vera said she knew. Your brother says the building's not worth saving. My brother hasn't been inside it. The woman looked at her for a beat, then said carefully, well, I do hope it works out. She went back into her office. Dale called once. He was brief and purposeful and had already decided what he wanted. He said there was a developer in Columbus interested in the lot, that the building would need to come down but the land had good value, and that if Vera signed it over to him, he could negotiate a split after the sale. He said it was the practical solution. He said Vera had always been good at practical things when she put her mind to it, which was the kind of compliment that wasn't. She said she would think about it. She did not call him back. She was at the sink washing dishes on the 14th day, Edna moving around her feet when she saw it. Along the base of the back wall, where the old dressing room doorway connected to the main ground floor space, there was a section of baseboard that ran at a slightly different height than the rest. 3 feet of it, near the northeast corner, sitting a 1/4 inch lower than the adjoining boards on either side. The paint was the same color, the same age, but the wood itself was different, newer, or at least different from the original. She crouched down and pressed her palm flat against the wall just above it. It gave, not much, a shallow flex, like pressing the center of a drum. The rest of the wall did not do that. She stood up slowly. The cat sat a foot away, looking at the same spot on the wall, which meant nothing, she told herself. Cats looked at walls. It was a thing they did. She went to bed that night with the wall in her mind, and the locked door at the top of the basement stairs, which the inspector had asked about, and she had not answered fully, because the truth was she had been thinking about that door since the day she arrived. And what Carl Benton had said in the hardware store 3 weeks ago. Your mother was a good woman. She knew what she was doing. Vera lay on the mattress in the back room with Edna pressed warm against her side and the building settling around her in the dark. The radiator she had run a line to clicked and breathed. Outside, the wind moved through the narrow gap between Maple Street and the building behind it, the same alley she had looked out at as a girl, hemming skirts while her mother worked. She thought about the will, about the fact that Dale had gotten the farmland and Patricia had gotten the savings and the jewelry, and that the two of them together had everything that looked like value. She had gotten this building, which everyone agreed was worth nothing. Her mother had known it was condemned. She had known it for 2 years before she died, and she had left it to Vera anyway. Not to Dale, who could have absorbed the repair costs without feeling them. Not to Patricia, who would have signed it over to a developer inside a month. To Vera, who had nothing else, who had nowhere else to be. Vera stared at the ceiling in the dark. She knew what she was doing. Maybe, Vera thought, the building was not what her mother had left her. Maybe the building was only where she had left something else. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow she would start looking more carefully. She started the next morning before the light was full. Edna was still at the foot of the mattress when Vera got up, curled into herself with the specific indifference of a cat that has decided a place is home. Vera put the kettle on the hot plate, drank her coffee standing by the alley window, and watched the sky go from gray to pale. Then she went to the northeast corner of the ground floor and crouched in front of the baseboard. In the daylight, it was easier to see. The section of board that ran lower than the rest was about 30 inches wide. Where it met the adjoining boards on either side, there were tiny gaps, not the gaps of old wood shrinking and pulling apart, but the gaps of something that had been fitted into place after the surrounding boards were already set. She ran her thumbnail along the edge. Clean. No paint bridge between this section and the next. Someone had cut it in. She got a butter knife from her dish rack, slid it into the gap on the left side, and worked along the seam. The board resisted, then shifted. She worked the knife down to the bottom, and the whole section swung outward on a pivot, like a very small door hinged at one vertical edge. Behind it was a shallow recess in the wall, about 4 inches deep and 18 inches wide. A cavity left between the original lath and a piece of plywood that had been set flush and then disguised with the baseboard. She sat back on her heels and looked at it. Inside the cavity were 4 things. A folded piece of paper, browned at the edges. A small brass key on a loop of old string. A bundle of letters tied with kitchen twine, maybe a dozen of them, the envelopes soft with age. And a photograph, black and white, tucked against the back of the cavity as though it had slid there or been placed flat to protect it. Vera did not reach in immediately. She stayed where she was for a moment, looking at the 4 objects in the hollow of the wall, feeling the specific weight of a thing that has been waiting. Then she picked up the folded paper first. Her mother's handwriting. She would have known it anywhere, the particular slant of it, the way the lowercase letters sat slightly above the line, as though always in a mild hurry. Vera, if you're reading this, you found what I left. I knew you would be the one. I've tried to say this in letters I never sent, so let me say it plainly here. The basement holds what your father saved. He locked it the month before he died, in the fall of 1987. I never opened it after. I could not. But I always believed it should go to someone who would understand what it was, and that was never Dale, and it was never Patricia. It was always you. The small key is not for the basement. It opens the Rosewood Box in the back room, second shelf of the built-in, behind the loose panel. The basement key is inside the box. Don't let anyone rush you. Take your time with it. Love, Mom. Vera read it twice. Then she sat on the cold floor with her back against the wall and did not move for a while. Edna appeared from somewhere and walked across her legs and settled in her lap. Outside on Maple Street a truck went past, and then it was quiet again. She had not cried when the divorce papers were signed. She had not cried in the lawyer's office in January when the will was read and Dale had coughed once into his fist. She had not cried any of the nights in this building when the wind moved through the gaps and the radiator made its uneven sounds and the mattress on the floor seemed like evidence of something she could not name. She cried now, sitting on the floor of her mother's old dress shop with a letter in her hand and a cat in her lap, and 31 years of marriage and a life she had thought was hers come down to this one room, this one morning, these 4 words. It was always you. She let herself have a few minutes. Then she folded the letter along its creases and put it in the pocket of her cardigan, and she went to look for the Rosewood Box. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. The back room had a built-in shelving unit along the south wall, the kind of carpentry that had been done by hand a long time ago, with no 2 shelves at exactly the same height. Vera had noticed it before, but not examined it closely. She ran her hand along the second shelf from the bottom, pressing at intervals. Near the right end the panel gave a section about 10 inches square that flexed inward under pressure and then caught, like a cabinet with a push latch. She pressed it again and it released. Behind the panel, on a small platform built into the wall, was a box. Rosewood, as her mother had said. About the size of a shoebox but shallower, with a fitted lid and a small brass escutcheon plate over the keyhole. The wood had darkened with age, but the grain was still visible, fine and close, the kind of piece that had been made to last. She turned the small brass key in the lock and the lid came open. Inside, resting on a piece of dark velvet, was a key, much larger than the one from the cavity. Old iron, heavy for its size, about 4 inches long with a simple bow and a long shaft that ended in 2 thick teeth. The kind of key that went with a very old, very heavy lock. On the velvet beside it was a slip of paper in her father's handwriting, a hand she recognized from birthday cards and grocery lists from childhood, rounder than her mother's and slightly labored. For when you're ready. Thomas, that was all. No date, just his name. Her father, Thomas Marsh, had died in October 1987, on a Thursday morning, of a heart attack. He had been 62 years old. Vera had been 22. Already living in Columbus, already in the early years with Gary. She had come home for the funeral and stayed a week and then driven back. Her mother had managed everything after that, the way her mother managed everything, quietly and without complaint and without calling it hardship. He had locked the basement in the fall of 1987, her mother's note said. The month before he died. Vera held the iron key and turned it over in her hands. It was not rusted. Someone had kept it clean, oiled it perhaps. Her mother, all these years, keeping the key in the Rosewood Box on the hidden shelf, never using it, unable to use it, but keeping it ready. She put the key in her cardigan pocket alongside the letter and went to the basement stairs. The door at the top of the stairs was ordinary enough, pine with a flat panel, paint over paint until the grain was only a ghost. It opened freely. She had gone this far before, stood at the top of the stairs looking down into the dark, turned on the flashlight on her phone. The stairs were steep and enclosed, the walls close on either side. At the bottom, another door. This one was heavier, old wood reinforced with iron strapping, and the padlock through the hasp was a serious piece of hardware, a 6-inch body padlock that had gone dark with rust on its exterior. She climbed down and examined the padlock. The keyway was corroded at the rim, but the interior looked clean. She inserted the iron key. It did not turn. She pulled it back a 1/4 inch and applied slight pressure left. Still nothing. She tried right. Felt something shift. Tried again with more deliberate pressure to the right, and the key moved, slowly, stiffly, with the particular resistance of a mechanism that has not been used in a very long time, but has not ceased. She kept steady pressure. The cylinder turned. The shackle released. She stood there with the open padlock in her hand. Then she put it in her pocket, took a breath, and pushed the door. It opened 4 inches and stopped. Not locked. Blocked. She pushed harder and felt resistance, something on the other side bearing against the door's movement. She worked it back and forth, pushing in short bursts, and gradually, with the sound of objects shifting and scraping, she got the door open wide enough to pass through. She stepped into the basement and turned on the flashlight. What she saw first was the sheer amount of it. The room was larger than she had expected, running the full footprint of the building and then some, extending back beneath the alley. The ceiling was low, stone arched above her. The old kind of basement that was built before concrete was standard, with limestone blocks fitted tight, and the mortar between them still mostly sound. The floor was stone too, large flat pieces set close. The room was full, not in a disordered way. Full in the way of a room that had been organized by someone who cared about what was in it. Along the left wall, furniture covered in old canvas sheeting, the shapes of chairs and table legs visible beneath. Along the right wall, wooden crates stacked 2 and 3 high, each one labeled in her father's handwriting, the ink still legible. Against the far wall, something large under a full canvas drop cloth, pushed back into the deepest part of the room. She stood in the doorway for a long moment and did not go in. She was not sure what stopped her exactly. Not fear. Something more like the recognition that certain moments do not repeat, and that walking into that room for the first time was one of them, and that she did not want to spend it in a rush. She went back upstairs. She made another cup of coffee. She sat at the folding table with Edna on the table beside her and the iron key and the letter in front of her, and she thought about her father, about what she knew of him, which was both a great deal and somehow not enough. Thomas Marsh had worked his whole adult life as a machinist at a plant outside of town that made agricultural parts. He had worked 6 days a week for 34 years. He had a workshop in the garage at the house on County Road 7 where he spent his Sundays, and what he made in that workshop, as far as Vera had known growing up, was furniture. Chairs and small tables and wooden boxes with fitted joints that needed no glue. He had a gift for it. He had never sold anything he made, that Vera knew of. He gave it away, mostly, or kept it. What she had not known, or not thought about in years, was that her father had also collected things. She was remembering it now in pieces. A shelf in the workshop that held objects he had found at estate sales or been given. Old tools, ceramic pieces, carved wooden figures, things that he would examine for a long time and then place on the shelf without explanation. Her mother had once said, mildly, that Thomas had an eye. Vera had not thought much about it at the time. She thought about it now. She put the key in her pocket and went to see Carl Benton. The hardware store on the square had been in Carl's family for 51 years. His father had opened it. Carl had taken it over at 32 and had run it since. He knew the town and its history the way people know things they have watched accumulate over time, not from study but from presence. Vera told him she had found the key to the basement. Carl set down what he was doing. He was a tall man in his late 60s, slow-moving but not slow-thinking, with the kind of face that holds information patiently. He looked at her for a moment. "You going down?" he asked. "I already did. Just briefly. I wanted to ask you something first." He waited. "My father locked the basement in the fall of 1987, just before he died. Do you know anything about why?" Carl was quiet for a moment. He picked up a bolt from the counter and turned it between his fingers without looking at it. "Tom was a private man," he said finally. "He didn't explain himself much. I know. But there was a period, in the early 80s, before your father's health started going, when he was spending a lot of time down at the county auction house. And farther out, estate sales. He had a real sense for things that other people walked past." Carl set the bolt down. "There was a painter who lived out on the Hadley Road for about 10 years, through the late 60s and into the 70s. Name was Connell. Raymond Connell. He wasn't famous when he lived here. He moved to New York around 1978, I think. He got famous after that. Vera waited. Your father knew him. Not well, but they were friendly. When Connell left, he gave some things to people in town. Couldn't take everything with him. Carl looked at her steadily. I don't know what your father had, Vera. I never saw inside that basement. But I know Tom Marsh had an eye, and I know he wasn't careless with the things he kept. That's all I can tell you. She thanked him and drove to the county library. The branch library in Sycamore Falls was a small limestone building 2 blocks off the main square, staffed by a woman named Darlene who had worked there for 23 years and who knew where everything was. Vera asked about Raymond Connell. Darlene knew the name. She brought 3 things to the reading table: a local history book from 1989 with a chapter on notable county residents, a file of photocopied newspaper clippings, and a printout she had pulled from an arts database she subscribed to. Raymond Connell had been born in 1934 in eastern Ohio. He had lived in Sycamore Falls from 1966 to 1978, renting a farmhouse on the Hadley Road and working, according to the local history book, in near total obscurity. He had worked in oil on large canvases, abstract but grounded, the critic's description said, in the specific textures of the American rural Midwest. He had sold almost nothing during his years in Sycamore Falls. He had moved to New York in 1978. The printout from the arts database covered the period after that: a solo show in 1981, a second show in 1984 that was reviewed in 3 national publications, a painting sold at auction in 1991 for $420,000, a retrospective at a museum in Chicago in 1997. The artist had died in 2004. Current auction estimates for his mid-period works, the works from the late 1960s through the late 1970s, the period when he had been living in Sycamore Falls, ranged from $600,000 to over $1.2 million per piece. Vera sat at the reading table for a while after Darlene left her to it. She thought about the large shape under the drop cloth at the far end of the basement. The way it had been pushed back carefully against the wall, as far from the damp of the door as possible. The canvas sheeting over it, not haphazard, but smoothed and tucked at the edges. Her father, locking the door the month before he died. For when you're ready. She drove back to Maple Street. She went down the basement stairs without stopping this time and walked to the center of the room. She stood there with the flashlight and made herself look at everything carefully, the way she had looked at the building's structure when she first arrived, not with feeling, or not only with feeling, but with attention. The crates along the right wall were labeled in her father's handwriting. Dishes, some of them. Books. Hardware. But near the far end of the right wall, for crates labeled with only a date, each one marked with a year. 1968, 1971, 1974, 1977. She crouched in front of the one marked 1968 and worked the lid off. Inside, cushioned in old cloth, were objects, ceramic pieces, hand-thrown, the glaze a dull green-gray that had the quality of something deliberate. She picked one up. The bottom was marked with a small incised signature she could not read in the flashlight's beam. She put it back carefully. She stood and went to the far wall and stood in front of the large covered shape. Up close it was taller than it had seemed from the door. Maybe 6 feet high and 4 wide, whatever was beneath the cloth. She took hold of the bottom edge of the canvas and lifted it slowly, folding it back over itself. Underneath was a wooden crate, built to measure, the front panel fitted with screws rather than nailed. Her father's work, she was almost certain, the joinery too clean to be anything else. Stenciled on the front in black paint. Fragile. Do not stand. Connell. R.M. Vera pressed her forehead against the wood for a moment. Then she straightened up. She was not going to open it tonight. Not alone. Not without knowing what she was doing. If what she suspected was inside that crate was what she suspected, then it needed to be handled properly, with the right people present, with documentation. She was not going to rush it. Her mother had kept this basement sealed for 37 years. One more night was not going to change anything. She went back upstairs. She fed the cat. She heated a can of soup on the hot plate and ate it standing at the sink, looking out the alley window at the narrow strip of sky between the buildings. Her phone showed a missed call from Dale. She did not return it. She sat down at the folding table and opened the bundle of letters she had, taken from the wall cavity. The kitchen twine untied easily. She spread the envelopes on the table. They were addressed in her mother's handwriting, all to the same address in Columbus, Vera's address, the apartment on the 4th floor. The one with the window that faced the brick wall. Her mother had never sent them. She opened the one at the top of the stack. Dear Vera, I am writing this on a Tuesday evening, and I don't know that I'll send it. I've been thinking about what I've left to each of you, and whether it's fair, and I keep coming back to the same answer, which is that fair is not the same as right. Dale has his career, and Patricia has her security, and you have always had something neither of them has, which is patience with the things other people walk past. Your father had that too. I am leaving you the building not because it is all I had left, but because it is the only thing I had that was suited to you. I hope you will trust me on this. She did not read the rest of the letters that night. She put them back in their stack, retied the twine, and placed them on the shelf beside the Rosewood Box. Then she turned off the light and lay down on the mattress with Edna warm against her ribs. Through the alley window, she could see a thin line of stars between the buildings. She was 58 years old, and she had nothing, and she was beginning to understand that perhaps nothing was not the word for it. She waited until morning to make the call, not because she was uncertain, but because she had learned something in the past few weeks about the difference between moving and rushing, and she did not want to rush this. She made coffee. She fed Edna. She sat at the folding table with the arts database printout Darlene had given her at the library and read it again, slowly, the way she used to read contracts at the dental practice before she signed anything on their behalf. Raymond Connell, born 1934, died 2004. His estate was now managed by a gallery in New York. His mid-period works, the paintings from his years in rural Ohio, were held in 4 private collections and 2 museum collections. The last one to come to auction had sold in 2019 at a house in Chicago for $1.1 million. The catalog note for that sale had described it as a rare opportunity, given how seldom Connell's work entered the market. Vera looked at the printout for a while. Then she called the auction house in Chicago. The woman who answered transferred her to a specialist in American post-war art named Marcus Hale. She told him what she had, where she was, and what the crate was stenciled. There was a pause on the line. You said Connell, he said. R.M. Connell. Yes. Another pause. And this has been in a sealed basement since the late 80s? Since October 1987, as far as I can establish. He asked if she could send photographs of the crate and the stenciling without opening it. She said she could. He said he would come himself if the photographs suggested what he thought they might suggest, and that she should not open the crate before he arrived. She told him she had no intention of doing that. She could hear something in his voice that sounded like a man working to stay measured, and that told her something. She sent the photographs that afternoon. Marcus Hale called back within the hour and said he could be in Sycamore Falls by Thursday. The 2 days before Thursday were the strangest of the whole stretch. The building was the same. The cat was the same. The routine was the same. The coffee and the kettle and the brief cold mornings when she went out the back to check the tarp she had patched a second time after a windstorm the week before. But something had shifted in the quality of the waiting. She had lived for weeks with the weight of not knowing, and now she was living with the weight of almost knowing, which was a different kind of pressure entirely. She went down to the basement twice, just to look. She did not touch anything. She stood in the middle of the stone floor with the flashlight and looked at the crate against the far wall, and at the canvas-covered furniture, and at the 4 dated crates along the right side. And she thought about her father in his workshop on County Road 7, his Sundays, the shelf of objects no one had asked much about. She thought about Raymond Connell on the Hadley Road, working through the 60s and 70s in a farmhouse in a small Ohio town, unknown, painting things no one was buying. She thought about 2 men being friendly, as Carl Benton had put it, and what that word held. On Wednesday afternoon, she went back to Carl's store. She asked him if he remembered anything more specific about her father and Connell. Carl thought about it for a moment. He was restocking a shelf of fasteners, and he kept working while he talked, which was how he always talked. Tom used to drive out to the Hadley Road on Sunday afternoons sometimes, he said. This would have been, the early 70s. I know because my father mentioned it once, said Tom. Marsh was out there watching some artist paint. Made it sound like a peculiar way to spend a Sunday. He moved a box of screws along the shelf. Tom never said much about it. You know how he was. Did he ever say Connell gave him anything? Carl was quiet for a moment. Then, he said once that Connell was generous with people who paid attention. That was the word he used. Attention. He looked at her. I didn't think much about it at the time. Tom said a lot of things that took a while to make sense. She thanked him and went back to Maple Street. That evening she sat with the bundle of letters from the wall cavity and read them all. Her mother had written 12 letters over the course of 11 years, from 2010 to 2021. None of them sent, each one finding a different way to say the same thing. That she thought about the building, that she thought about what was in the basement, that she thought about Vera, that she believed the two belonged together, and that she was sorry it had taken her so long to be sure. The last letter was dated 4 months before her mother died. I have put the key in the Rosewood Box and the box behind the panel and the small key in the wall. I know that sounds like a lot of steps, but I wanted you to have to work for it a little, because things that come without effort don't stay with you the same way. Also, honestly, I think the searching will do you good. You have always been better at looking than you know. Vera folded that letter back into its envelope and held it for a while. Marcus Hale arrived on Thursday morning in a dark SUV with Illinois plates, accompanied by a colleague named Petra, who carried a case of equipment and said very little. He was younger than Vera had expected, early 40s, with the careful hands of someone who spent his professional life touching things he was afraid of damaging. He shook Vera's hand at the front door of the building, looked up at the facade, and then looked at her. "How long have you been living here?" he asked. "About 6 weeks. He looked at the building again. "And no one else has been in the basement." The city inspector stood at the top of the stairs. He didn't go down. Marcus nodded, and something in his expression settled, the way a person settles when they have been hoping for a particular answer and received it. He asked to see the building before going to the basement. Vera walked him through it, the ground floor, the back room, the second floor with the tarped roof section. He paid attention to the building the way she had learned to pay attention to it, looking at materials and age and what had been done by hand. He asked about the built-in shelving in the back room, and she told him her father had made it. He crouched and looked at the joinery the way Carl Benton had once described her father looking at things, for a long time, without rushing. Then they went downstairs. She had left the padlock open on its hasp, and the door pushed back. Marcus went in first with a proper flashlight, a long-beamed one that filled the low stone room in a way her phone light had not. He stood in the center of the room and swept the beam slowly around. He did not say anything for almost a full minute. Then he said, quietly, to Petra, "Get the kit." He walked to the crate at the far wall and crouched in front of it. He read the stenciling. He ran 2 fingers along the joint where the front panel met the frame, feeling the wood, feeling the construction. He looked at Vera over his shoulder. "Your father built this crate." It was not a question. "I believe so," she said. "He built it to climate specifications. The joint tolerance is tight enough to create a near-sealed interior. He used the right wood, the right thickness." He stood back up. "This has been protecting whatever is inside it for 37 years. That matters more than you might think." He and Petra worked the front panel off with careful, unhurried movements, removing the fitted screws one by one and setting the panel aside against the wall. Inside the crate was a second layer of protection, acid-free board, cut to fit, covering whatever was behind it. Marcus lifted the boards away one at a time. Behind them, wrapped in archival tissue and separated by foam batting, were 2 canvases on stretcher bars. He laid them on the stone floor one at a time, handling each by the edges of the stretcher. Petra set up a portable light source. Marcus crouched over the first canvas and looked at it for a long time without speaking. Then he said, 68 by 48 inches. Oil on canvas. The brushwork is consistent with his early to mid-period. He turned to Vera. "Do you have anything with him that would establish provenance? Letters, photographs, any written record of a gift or exchange?" She thought of the dated crates. She went to the one marked 1971 and worked the lid off. Inside, under a layer of cloth, was a small bundle of paper. Letters, 6 of them, folded. The top one was addressed to her father in a hand she did not recognize. The ink faded to brown. She brought them to Marcus. He read the first 2 without expression. Then he sat back on his heels and looked at the ceiling for a moment. "This is a letter from Connell to your father," he said. "Dated June 1971. He's describing 2 paintings he's setting aside for Tom because, and I'm reading directly here, Tom is the only person in this county who looks at them the way they're meant to be looked at." He set the letter down on the stone floor with great care. "That is provenance." The 2 paintings were catalogued that afternoon. The first, which Connell had titled in a label affixed to the back of the stretcher, was called Sycamore, late October. 68 by 48 inches, oil on canvas, dated 1971 in the artist's hand. The second, larger, was titled Field Study No. 4. 84 by 60 inches, oil on canvas, dated 1974. Marcus gave her an initial estimate that he said would need to be confirmed by formal appraisal. Based on comparable sales, he said, looking at her steadily, the 1971 work would likely carry an estimate of between $800,000 and $1.1 million at auction. The 1974 work, being larger and from a slightly later period within the mid-decade grouping that collectors currently preferred, would likely estimate between $1 and $1.4 million. That was before considering the letters, which established a documented personal provenance that would add value to both works. Vera sat down on the stone floor. It was not the most dignified thing she had ever done, sitting down on a cold basement floor in her cardigan and her work trousers. She sat down because her legs had decided to stop holding her up, and she sat there while Marcus Hale carefully repacked the first canvas and Petra photographed the letters and the crates, and Edna, who had followed them all down the stairs without anyone inviting her, walked across Vera's legs and sat in her lap. That helped, actually. The dated crates held more. The ceramic pieces were by a craftsman named Abella who had worked briefly in the county in the 1960s and whose work, Marcus said, had a modest but real collector market, the kind that would not make headlines but would return solid value. The furniture under the canvas sheeting was her father's own work, and while it carried no commercial significance in the way the Connell paintings did, two of the pieces were of a quality that a folk art specialist might want to look at. There were also, at the bottom of the crate marked 1968, 7 gold coins. American Eagles, pre-1933, each in a small paper sleeve in her father's handwriting with a date of acquisition. Marcus said he was not a coin specialist, but that pre-1933 American Eagles in good condition commonly sold for between $1,500 and $2,000 apiece in the current market. Marcus and Petra left that evening with photographs, measurements, and digital scans of the provenance letters. Marcus told her to expect a formal written appraisal within 2 weeks and said that when she was ready to discuss options, whether auction, private sale, or donation to an institution, his house could advise her on all three. He gave her his card and shook her hand at the front door and looked once more at the facade of the building. Your father was a careful man, he said. He was, she said, and patient. Both. Marcus nodded. He looked like he wanted to say something more and then decided not to. He got in the SUV and drove back toward the highway. Carl Benton called her the next morning. Someone had seen the out-of-state vehicle parked on Maple Street, and in a town of 3,000 people, an unfamiliar SUV outside the condemned building was enough to start a conversation. Carl didn't ask directly what had happened. He just said he hoped things were going all right, and that if she needed anything she should say so. She told him she had found what her mother had left for her. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Good. That was all. It was enough. Dale called on Saturday. His voice carried a different quality than it had before. Not softer exactly. More careful. Someone had told him something. She could hear that clearly, though he did not say so directly. He opened by asking how she was getting along, which he had not done since January. Fine, she said. I heard you've had some people in, he said. From out of town. I've had a visitor, yes. A pause. Vera, look, I want to be straight with you. I've been hearing some things, and if there's something in that building that has value, we should be talking about it together. As a family. She let the sentence sit for a moment. The building was left to me, she said. What's in it was left to me. That's what the will says, Dale. I know what the will says. His voice tightened just slightly, the way it did when he was working to stay reasonable and finding it effortful. But Mom wouldn't have wanted us divided over this. I think if she'd known what was down there, she might have done things differently. She knew, Vera said. Silence. She knew exactly what was down there, Vera said. She wrote me letters about it. She thought about it for 11 years. She decided. She kept her voice even. Not cold, just clear. She decided, Dale. He did not say anything for a long moment. I think you should come and see it, she said then. And she said it not as a provocation, but because she meant it, because something in her had made a decision about what kind of person she was going to be now. And that person did not operate from the desire to keep people out. Come and see what Dad kept. Not to negotiate. Just to see it. He was your father, too. Another silence. Then, all right. He came the following week. Patricia came with him, which Vera had not anticipated, and Patricia's second husband, who stood near the door throughout and did not say much. Dale wore work clothes, which she had never seen on him, as though he had dressed for what he thought this would be. She took them down to the basement. She had set up 2 proper work lights by then, borrowed from the hardware store, and the room was fully lit for the first time, the stone walls and the curved ceiling and the flat floor all visible in their particulars. She had not moved anything. The crate front was leaning against the wall where Marcus and Petra had set it, and the 2 canvases were back inside, repacked, waiting for the formal appraisal. Dale stood in the center of the room and turned slowly, looking at everything. He did not say anything for a long time. Patricia made a sound that was not quite a word. She walked to the canvas-covered furniture and lifted a corner of the sheeting, looked at the chair beneath, let the sheeting fall. Dad built all of this, Dale said finally. It was not a question. He recognized the work the same way Vera had recognized it, from some stored knowledge of their father's hands. The furniture, yes, Vera said. The crates, the storage system, all of it. Dale crouched in front of the crate against the far wall and read the stenciling. She watched his face and saw him understand what the name meant, or begin to understand it. He had been in real estate long enough to know about asset value, about what names carried in a market. How many, he asked. 2 paintings, a body of ceramic work, Dad's furniture, some coins. He stood up. He put his hands in his pockets and looked at the floor for a moment. When he looked up, there was something in his expression she had not seen on his face in a very long time, not since they were much younger, before he had become the kind of man who knew in advance what he thought about things. He never said a word, Dale said. Not to her exactly, just to the room. No, she said. He didn't. Patricia was standing near the stairs. Her eyes were moving around the room, but her face was difficult to read. She was not a woman who let things show easily. After a moment, she said, Mom left you this on purpose. Yes. She could have told us what was here. She could have, Vera said. She chose not to. Patricia looked at her. Why you? Vera thought about the letters on the shelf upstairs, 12 of them, 11 years of her mother finding different words for the same answer. She thought about what Carl Benton had said about her father, about attention, about paying it to things other people walked past. She thought about herself at the folding table in this building for 6 weeks, learning to replace a wax ring on a toilet, climbing onto a wet roof with a tarp and a hammer, sleeping on a mattress on the floor with a stray cat. Because I would stay, she said. Patricia looked at her for a moment longer. Then she nodded, once, and looked away. Dale shook her hand before he left. It was an odd gesture between siblings, stiff and formal, but she took it for what it was, acknowledgement. He did not apologize. He did not ask again about a share. He shook her hand and walked up the stairs and out the front door of the building on Maple Street, and she heard his car start and pull away from the curb. Patricia stopped at the top of the basement stairs and turned back. The building looks better, she said, since you've been here. Then she left too. The formal appraisal arrived 3 weeks later, 14 pages from Marcus Hale's firm with full documentation, condition reports, and market comparables. The 1971 Connell was valued for insurance purposes at $940,000. The 1974 Connell at $1.2 million. The ceramics by Abella at $62,000 for the collection. The coins at just over $13,000. Her father's furniture, assessed by a folk arts specialist Marcus brought in from Cincinnati, at $22,000 for the 2 pieces of highest quality, with the remainder not formally valued but noted as significant examples of vernacular craft. All told, the contents of the basement on Maple Street, sealed by her father in October 1987 and untouched for 37 years, had a documented combined value of just over $2.2 million. She sat with the appraisal document at her folding table for a long time after the courier left. Edna sat on the table beside her, ignoring the papers with the serene indifference of a creature who had never needed documentation of anything. She had $43,000 in consumer debt from the years after the divorce, the credit card she had used to keep the apartment, the loan she had taken when the dental practice closed. She paid it off in full the week after the appraisal came through. Using a portion of a short-term loan she was able to secure using the appraisal as collateral. She paid it in one payment, a single transfer, and then sat and looked at the zero balance for a while. She did not sell either Connell painting immediately. She placed them with Marcus Hale's firm under a consignment agreement to be offered through their spring sale, 8 months away. She sold the pre-1933 gold coins through a dealer Marcus recommended and used that money to hire a structural engineer to assess the building properly and a roofer to replace the failing section above the northwest corner. The roofer finished in 6 days. The structural engineer's report confirmed what the city inspector had suggested. The building was fundamentally sound. The condemnation notice was lifted 4 weeks after the report was submitted to the building authority. The inspector, the same man who had come 3 times now, handed her the provisional certificate of occupancy in the front room of the building. He looked around at the space, at the new plaster she had applied to the damaged section, at the floor she had cleaned and treated, at the light coming through the repaired windows. "You've done good work in here," he said. She thanked him. "What are you going to do with it?" he asked. He seemed genuinely curious. She had thought about this. She had thought about it in the evenings at the folding table and in the mornings with her coffee, and on the days she spent in the basement carefully cataloging everything that was there, every piece, every letter, every object her father had kept. She had thought about what a building on a main street of a small town could be, and what it had already been, and what it might still hold. "I'm going to restore it," she said. "The second floor is going to be a working space. For artists, maybe. Studio rentals, something accessible." She paused. "And the ground floor, eventually, I'd like to have it be a place where people can see work. Local work. The kind of thing that doesn't usually get a room." The inspector nodded. He looked around once more. Then he left. Carl Benton put her in touch with 2 other longtime residents who had known her father. Both of them had stories. One, a woman of 81 named Helen, remembered Vera's father driving her home in a snowstorm one January when her own car had failed, then sitting in her kitchen and looking at a painting she had on the wall for 20 minutes before asking politely who had made it. She had no idea who had made it. It had come with a house she bought in 1969. Tom Marsh had told her to keep it safe. She still had it. She brought it to Vera on a Tuesday afternoon, wrapped in a wool blanket, and Vera thanked her and promised to look into it, though she said nothing more than that. Some things could wait. The spring auction took place on a Saturday morning in Chicago. Vera was not there in person. She sat in the back room on Maple Street with her phone and a cup of coffee and Edna on the table, and she followed the bidding on the live auction feed Marcus Hale's firm had set up. The 1971 Connell, Sycamore, late October, sold for $1.05 million to a private buyer whose identity was not disclosed. The 1974 Connell, Field Study No. 4, sold for $1.35 million to a collector represented by a New York gallery. Vera put her phone face down on the table. She pressed her palms flat against the wood surface and looked at the alley window and the strip of May sky between the buildings. A pale blue, the particular blue of a morning that hasn't decided yet what it's going to be. She thought about her father on his Sundays, driving out the Hadley Road, watching a man paint fields and trees and light on an Ohio afternoon. She thought about what it meant to pay attention to something no one else thought was worth watching, to believe in a thing's value before anyone agreed with you about it, to keep it safe for 37 years without ever saying a word. She thought about her mother writing letters she never sent. About 12 attempts to explain a decision that did not need explaining, not really, not to anyone who had paid the kind of attention her mother was counting on. She thought about the folding table and the milk crate and the wax ring on the bathroom floor and the tarp she had stretched over a wet roof with scraped palms. She thought about the night she had read the inspector's notice and put it in her coat pocket and said thank you and meant it. Not because she was grateful for the notice, but because she had learned that you said thank you to the things that tested you, because those were the only things that showed you what you were. She picked up her phone. She called Dale. He answered on the second ring, cautious. "The painting's sold today," she said. A pause. And I wanted you to know." She thought for a moment. "Dad would have wanted you to know." He was quiet for a while. Then he said, low and not quite steady, "What was it like?" "The 1974 one. Petra sent me the photograph, but photographs don't." "Come and see the basement," Vera said. "There's still plenty down there. Come and see it properly. Bring the kids if you want. Dad's work is still there." She heard him breathe. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, all right." She hung up and sat in the back room while the sun moved across the alley outside. Edna jumped down from the table and walked to the door that led to the ground floor and sat in front of it, waiting for Vera to open it, which was what she always did at this time of morning. Vera opened the door. The cat walked out ahead of her. The ground floor was filling with light through the new glass in the windows. The repaired plaster was drying to a clean white. The floor she had waxed by hand over 2 long evenings had come up warm, the old grain of the hardwood showing through decades of grime. It looked like itself, finally, or what it had always been underneath. She walked through to the front of the building and stood at the window that faced Maple Street. The street was quiet in the way of a Saturday morning. A woman walking a dog. The insurance agency, closed. Carl's hardware store, lights on. She thought about the building and what it had been. A dress shop for 31 years, sealed and passed over for 2 decades, condemned by a city office on the basis of a drive-by assessment, signed over to a woman everyone agreed had gotten the short end of things and should probably take whatever she could get from the lot. She thought about what it was now. She was 58 years old. She had been divorced, displaced, laid off, and left with nothing that looked like anything. She had slept on a floor in a condemned building with a stray cat and a kettle and $4,300 worth of debt, and she had tarped a roof and fixed a toilet and found a key behind a piece of baseboard her mother had cut into a wall and been patient enough not to tell anyone about for 11 years. The door at the bottom of the basement stairs was open now. She had not locked it again after Marcus and Petra left, and she did not plan to. The stone room with the curved ceiling and the flat floor was there, visible from the top of the stairs, lit by the work lights Carl had lent her and that she had decided to keep. She had put a chair down there, a simple wooden one her father had made, in the center of the room, so that when she went down to think she had somewhere to sit. She went there sometimes in the evenings, just to be in the room. Not because there was anything left to find, because it was the room where her father had placed the things that mattered most to him, carefully, over years, one at a time, and then closed the door. Not to hide them, to hold them, to make sure they would last until they found their way to someone who would understand what they were. She understood now. The building on Maple Street in Sycamore Falls, Ohio, would be fully restored by the following spring. The second floor would open as a studio space, offered at subsidized rates to working artists in the region, funded by a small foundation Vera established using a portion of the sale proceeds and named after both her parents. The ground floor would become a gallery, open 4 days a week, showing work by local and regional artists who did not otherwise have a room of their own. The chair in the basement stayed where it was. Some mornings, before the town woke up fully, Vera went down and sat in it with her coffee and Edna, who had discovered the basement on her own terms and decided it was acceptable. The stone walls held the cool and the quiet, and through the door at the top of the stairs the light from the ground floor came down in a long rectangle across the floor. It was not a sealed room anymore. It was just a room, and that made all the difference. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.